You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode 19. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Hello and welcome back to the Tricorder Transmissions. This week we will not be covering an episode of the show, but fear not, we have some great stuff to talk about. I am Craig, as always. Jeff is here.
Jeff is here.
Yes. So Jeff, I know our schedule has been a little hectic the last couple of weeks. You were on vacation. I was on vacation. We had some colds thrown into the mix. So it's been a challenging couple of weeks for us.
It has. We missed our first Sunday since we started doing this over a year ago.
It did pain us to not be with you guys on that Sunday. But what we have to talk about today, we thought was worth doing because in a couple of days, this is going to end. And we want to make sure you know about it before it does. And that's the special Kickstarter that's going on for Season 3 of These Are The Voyages. As you know, we talked to Marc Cushman a couple weeks ago about Season 3, and it was a little up in the air about when it was coming out. So when we talk to Marc, we're going to learn exactly why they went the Kickstarter route. But this Kickstarter is a great opportunity for everyone to get this book for a great price. It's basically going to be $40, including the shipping, which is pretty much what it's going to go for if you were going to buy it on Amazon.
True, and it's also autographed. And by the way, this is also your only opportunity to get a copy of this book before Christmas and before New Year's. I mean, you probably won't have this book available for general sale until after the New Year, I would imagine, because all the copies he's getting done from the Kickstarter will be going to the backers.
Right. So we hit a lot of great information. Every time we've spoke with Marc, either at the convention or on air here for the Tricorder Transmissions, it's been a really fascinating conversation, and this one's no different. But we also talked to Alec Peters, who is the creator of Axanar and the short prelude to Axanar. And those folks they sort of put this Kickstarter together for Marc, and These Are The Voyages. So we also talked to Alec a little bit about Axanar, which is a really, really fascinating project.
And it is what he is calling an independent Star Trek film. And if you go over to his site, StarTrekAxanar.com, you can watch the 20 some odd minute preview video. And it was also shown at the Vegas Star Trek convention. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see it. We were kind of engrossed in some other things. But a lot of our Star Trek friends from the convention are extremely excited about this project.
Yeah, and I think if you watch that 21-minute prelude, which is sort of their, their proof of concept, if you will,
yes,
you'll be really impressed. It looks really good. Yeah. And in addition to looking really good, they've got some top-notch acting talent involved as well.
Oh, for sure. So a couple of veterans from the Battlestar Galactica reboot, and the Candyman himself is part of it.
Tony Todd.
Yeah. So and a whole other cast of characters. So we'll let you hear all about it when we get there.
So and we promise next week we'll be back to our regularly scheduled commentary track. But this week we think you're really going to enjoy what we serve up. And speaking of serving up, Jeff, I want to take this opportunity to wish you, as well as all of our listeners, a very happy Thanksgiving this coming Thursday.
Oh yeah, it's come up upon us pretty quickly, and another year has gone by, and it's time to reflect on things and give thanks for where we are and what we have, and be with our family and loved ones. We hope all of our listeners out there get a chance to be with your families and loved ones this holiday season.
Right on. Sort of following the theme of Thanksgiving, it seems like this episode's going to be a little overstuffed. So enjoy the extra couple of minutes of show that you're going to get from us this week.
Absolutely. And just as we had in our last episode with Marc Cushman, you're going to get a lot of really interesting information about Star Trek, the original series. So without further ado, you want to jump right in with Marc's interview?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Here we go. Hey, we're back at the Tricorder Transmissions, and we have a special treat for you guys this weekend. We are having a follow-up discussion with Marc Cushman, author of These Are The Voyages TOS book series. How's it going, Mark?
It's going great. Good to talk to you guys again. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Craig.
Hello.
Hey, it's great to have you back. And the reason why we wanted to have you on and we're doing this special episode this weekend is because we are coming to the end of the Kickstarter campaign for the third book in the These Are the Voyages series. That's the season 3 book. Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, everybody who's donated to Kickstarter, thank you. And you've made it possible for book 3 to be out this year. It had been pushed back until spring of 2015. And so we threw it open to Kickstarter and thought, well, if enough people want to get it now, we'll make it something that they can have, and they have. And so now it's going to be out. So by going to Kickstarter and going to These Are the Voyages, you can get a copy for the same price that it would cost to get it afterwards next year. But you can get it, and hopefully you'd receive it before Christmas.
Now that's fantastic because the audience of the show, hopefully everybody's listened to the previous episode with Mark talking about the first 2 books. That was a few weeks ago. If you haven't listened to that, listen to this episode, go back and listen to those 2, and it'll give you all the background on the previous 2 books and hopefully get you amped up for this Kickstarter that's for the 3rd book and final book in the series. So, Mark, you had hinted at some interesting things in the 3rd book that you wanted to hold off on talking about until you came back on the show. You want to throw a few of those things out for us?
Sure. Some of the most fascinating things in this research and through all the show files that exist and all the memos and everything was documented. But it's such a chore to go through it all because it's not readily available online. You have to go down to UCLA and you have to go to other places to go through all this stuff. And it takes a lot of time. I took 6 months just going to UCLA to go through all these boxes. It's so immense to find all the answers to all the mysteries of all 3 seasons. And there were so many in the last 2 books, as you guys know, especially like in season 2 about Nimoy almost didn't come back and why Gene Kuhn left and how Lucille Ball lost her studio because of the gamble that she did on Star Trek and everything else. Well, the drama gets even greater in season 3. As it should, because you look at the making of Star Trek over those 5 years. It was a 5-year mission. It took him 5 years to do it from The Cage all the way to Turnabout Intruder, but it was only on NBC for 3 years. And you look at those 3 years, it's kind of like a 3-act structure to a movie. It gets more and more dramatic with each act, and the risk and the danger gets bigger with each act, and the pressure on the characters gets bigger, and the jeopardies. And what was going on in season 3, as you guys probably know, as most fans probably know, is first of all, it was supposed to go to Monday nights at 7:30, which would have been an ideal time slot for Star Trek. And NBC agreed to do that because they got almost 1 million protests between individual letters and petitions and marchers and everything else, all told together. And at the last minute, they switched gears and said, we're going to put you at Friday nights from 10 to 11, which is known in the industry as the death slot.
Right.
It is the single worst time slot of the entire week. I mean, Sunday nights is a pretty good night, and all other nights aren't. Back then, Saturday nights were a good night. Saturdays were a great night for TV. Now they're not. People go out more, but back in the day, when people had tighter budgets and more families stayed home, that's when you had, All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Burnett and Mannix and Bob Newhart and all these great shows that were on Saturday nights and doing great and being the top-rated shows from Saturday night. The one night that was bad was Friday, because that's when, especially for young audiences, high schoolers and college kids were at ball games and out on dates and school events. And so Friday from 10 to 11 was just a horrible time slot. And they knew they were dead. And NBC knew they were dead too. And there were some information going around at NBC, which is revealed in book 3, that they were not going to pick up Star Trek for a 4th year no matter what. And they knew this before even going into the 3rd year. They set it up to where this would be the last season. And if you read book 1 and 2, you know why. You see the battles building. That this was a show that was crossing the lines with NBC on so many different levels. It was the sexiest show on TV. It may be hard to imagine now, but go back and look at anything else from that era. I mean, these miniskirts were the first miniskirts on television, and Kirk was making out with green-skinned women, and you name it. And they were doing stories about racism and sexism and religion and Vietnam, and at a time when entertainment shows weren't supposed to touch on any of those subjects in a serious way. They were saved for the news division. And then they had Gene Roddenberry, who NBC and the studio was constantly butting heads with because he was on a mission to tell the stories he wanted to tell and to do the show the way he felt it should be done. And he didn't bend to corporate. And corporate doesn't like people who don't bend to them. So the decision had pretty much been made that they were going to get Star Trek off the air. And the best way to do it was put it on Friday nights at 10 to 11. At the same time, Desilu went out of business. They failed because of the cost of Star Trek. So Paramount took over, bought Lucille Ball out, and they came in and said, you're not going to do to us what you did to Desilu. Star Trek was the second most expensive TV show on TV. And they said, we're cutting your budget severely. And we're going to wrap it up this year and take what episodes we have and throw them into syndication and goodbye Star Trek. And it's ironic because Star Trek has become the feather in the cap to Paramount Corporation and saved the studio many times over the decades. But in 1968 and 69, they didn't want anything to do with it. You've got all that drama playing out. And then on top of that, Gene Roddenberry feels betrayed by NBC, and so he leaves, brings in Fred Freiberger, and who's just kind of thrown into the arena, and with no support. And he thought Gene would be there working with him at his side, and he finds out nobody at the network will even talk to him because he's associated with Roddenberry, he's associated with Star Trek. They won't even return his phone calls. The hostility is everywhere. So you have these, it's almost like Custer's Last Stand. You have Freiberger and William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy and whoever was left surrounded by whoever they're fighting. And the numbers are overwhelming, and they just don't have a chance, and they know it. And they know they're going down for their last stand, and they just want to do it as well as they can. And we'll look at that third year and say, well, it's not as good as the first two. There's no way it could have been under the circumstances. But they really were trying as hard as they could to keep it as good as they could under the circumstances. One other thing, and I'll stop on this long speech and let you guys ask a question. But the other thing that was going on top of all this, just to set the scene for the drama, and we can talk about a couple of specific episodes if you like, but this was the year that the FCC decided they were going to get violence off of television. They had been hinting at it for a couple of years of putting more and more pressure on the networks. But it was in 1968 that they made their big move. And so this is an action-adventure show. And suddenly they're telling them to take the action out of the action-adventure show. So we look at that third season and we say, well, it doesn't have the movement of the first two, or it doesn't have the excitement of the first two. Well, first of all, you don't have the money, and secondly, you're not being allowed to do anything that's really very exciting. Beyond that, they lean more towards very engaging scientific concepts and science fiction concepts because that's the only direction they could go.
Excellent. So before we jump into the third season, we just wanted to talk about how great this Kickstarter is for you guys in the sense that it's allowing you to get the book out early. But if you've been on the fence about getting any of these books, this is a great opportunity to not only get volume 3, but to get also volumes 1 and 2 and some other really cool rewards. One thing we're looking at in a level, Mark, is original film trim from the editing room floor. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, in 1968, when that first Save Star Trek campaign was going on, actually the second, but it was the big one that saved it at the end of its second season when NBC had actually canceled the show, and the fans rose up and they roared and got that third year. And by the way, in the books, you get the ratings there, and you'll find out that it was not the disaster we had always been told. The ratings were actually pretty respectable. Again, it was all politics, and it was everything else that was going against it. But Bijou Trimble, who was working for Roddenberry, and she was a fan, she said, people will pay for these clips, and the fans will want them. You're throwing these things away. You're sweeping them up off of the editing room floor. So she got permission from Roddenberry. He didn't believe anybody would pay for them, but he said, if the fans want them, go ahead and collect them. So she went to the editors and said, don't throw these things away. Put them in a bag, and I'll get them every day. And it was all the trims. as they're cutting the episode together, and all the footage that they don't need would end up on the floor. And so they started selling those things through Lincoln Enterprises, which was Roddenberry's mail order company, which was launched in '68. And throughout the late '68 and '69 and '70, maybe even to '71, they were selling these film trims for like 99 cents. You'd get about 10 of them. So these are from that batch. These are clips that we've acquired from Roddenberry.com and from a couple private collectors that were left over from Roddenberry that hadn't been sold and had been in the warehouse forever, and then from some collectors. And so these are the actual film trims from 1968 and '69, and even some from '66 and '67 that they had, that they were just kind of keeping in case they had to need stuff for anything like an extra shot of the Enterprise or an extra shot of something, establishing shots. And so you can get those as part of the rewards along with the books.
Yeah, that is really a great reward level. And we're going to put a link to the Kickstarter, obviously, in our show notes. But like I said, if you've been on the fence, this is really a great opportunity to get all three of the books. And some of the rewards level even get you the e-version of the book. It's really a great opportunity for everyone. And
I'll say one more thing about the Craig. One more thing about the clips is I saw them back in '68. A friend of mine got some from Lincoln Enterprises, and you'd put them in a projector and put them up on a white wall, and the colors were incredibly vivid. They were just amazing, more than the television could present back then because we didn't have high definition TV.
yeah.
Well, you're not going to quite see that. They've faded a little bit. The colors have faded and turned a little towards the red and the pink hues. But that's because they're authentic. You know, it's just like looking at an antique. If it's not a little scratched up, it ain't worth having. And so these are the real things. If you were to find clips that had vibrant color, they probably came from the late '70s or even the '80s when the show was being rerun and they were still using film.
Yeah.
And they hadn't started putting it on disc to send around. The actual authentic ones from the late '60s have faded a little bit because of the age and how that affects film, but they still look pretty good. So that's how you know they're authentic. And by the way, because these have come from special sources, they are not just one frame, but usually it's two, sometimes 3 frames or 2.5 frames, all in a strip. It's not like it's been clipped to be one frame like they were projecting on walls. A lot of the people were doing to fit them into little cards. These are the actual strips that are a little bit longer.
Oh, wow. That is a great detail.
Very cool. I also noticed, Mark, there's another reward level here that includes copies of scripts that were given to you by Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah, Susan Sackett, who was Gene Roddenberry's assistant, gave me every single Star Trek script back in 1982 when I first went over to meet Gene and talked to him the first time about this project, which took so many years for me to get around to doing and to bring forward. There was actually going to be a TV special at that point. And then Paramount refused to cooperate, so we switched gears and decided to go as a book since we couldn't get film clips to show. And so she gave me all the scripts and to go copy and return because they were from Gene's private collection there in the office. And there are a lot of first drafts, a lot of second drafts. A lot of them are first and second drafts and so forth. And this was a lot of the resource I used in writing the book, being able to compare the first drafts to the final drafts and show you what the producers, Gene Kuhn and Dorothy Fontana and Fred Freeberger and Gene Roddenberry would do in their rewriting of the scripts, because I would have the first and last drafts to compare to, and along with all their memos and notes. And so I have all these scripts, and so we will copy them. And you can, and whoever donates can tell us what script they want. Tell us your favorite episode, and I will look through them personally before we copy them and send them out. Probably take me days, depending on how many people are going to that level, because I just want to make sure that the quality of the script is in good shape. You know, there were a couple that were missing a page, or there were a couple where the photocopy had the page off center, or maybe it was a little faded and so forth. And there's others that are just pristine. So, you know, when somebody says, I want this particular script, before we send it off to get copied, I'll take a quick look at it. And if I feel that it's compromised in any way, we'll send an email to that person and say, would you like to make another choice? Because here's what I don't like about this particular script. But most of them, 90% of the ones that are in really good shape. So it's only a few that there might be a problem there, but I will personally check them to make sure that there's a heads up on that in case it's one of the few that has a little problem to it.
Excellent, excellent. And we also noticed that one of the rewards levels gets you the Naked Time script autographed by John D.F. Black, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, John is going to sit down and autograph those for us. I think we have 20 or 25 people so far that have asked for that. And there'll probably be a few more coming up. And John's been very good. He's already autographed about 20. So he'll come back over. I'll go over to his place next week after this wraps up and get him to sign some more. So he'll sign the cover page right by his name. And remember, John D.F. Black, he was the first producer there with Gene Roddenberry on the show. And then when he left, Gene Kuhn came in and took over. He was also the executive script consultant. So he was there with Roddenberry during those first 16 episodes. His name appeared on the screen for the first 13, but he was there through the first 16. And so he and Roddenberry were personally rewriting all these scripts to get the voices right. And these scripts were the template for everything that was going to follow. So they really together, mostly Gene, but John as well, created the voices that then Gene Kuhn and everybody else would carry on with. The voices of Kirk and Spock, the way they talked, the way they behaved, the way they came across. It all came from these two men. And John is the guy who came up with the line space, the final frontier. Gene Roddenberry had been procrastinating in writing that because he was so busy rewriting scripts. And so John, to get him started, wrote the first line and said, here. And Gene wrote the second and sent it back to John, and John wrote the third and sent it back to Gene. And that's how it came about. So John D.F. Black is still a legend in his own time, and he's here to autograph these.
That's awesome. Before we move into talking about season 3 itself and maybe a couple little excerpts from the book, I wanted to mention one more pledge level, and I want to say to everybody out there, this is the lowest pledge level I would say you should go if you want to just get in somewhere, and that's the $40 level, and that gets you an autographed hardcover copy of the book. And Craig and I both have autographed copies of the first 2 books, and I say that's a great thing to have, and it's nice to know that Mark handled your book and signed it for you and sent it to you. And I think Craig will also attest at how nice these books really are.
Oh yeah, they're definitely the marquee piece of my bookshelf.
Yeah, same here. And
you better put some support under that bookshelf, because book 3 is the biggest and the heaviest of them all. It's 3.5 pounds.
Oh wow, we can't wait.
Oh, that's incredible.
It was a very hard labor for me.
Oh my God. So I'm going to assume that it's going to match up nicely with the first 2 books spine wise on the shelf.
Yeah, they were all designed after that first edition that came out. It was rushed out back in August of last year for the August Star Trek convention in Vegas. I didn't like that. I didn't like the cover. It wasn't proofed very well, and so forth. So that was a first edition. And then before the end of the year, the revised first edition came out. So if anybody's got the old one,
I do.
The old black cover.
That's me.
Well, I hear it's worth a little bit more now because it's there's not that many of them out there. But the revised one has more information in it. It's a cleaner version. It's got a nicer cover, and its cover with book 2 and book 3 all kind of match. And what that means is when you put them all together, the spine is going to spell out TOS. There's T at the top of the first book, O at the second, S on the third, and they just look like they belong together, all right next to one another.
Oh, that's
so.
awesome.
So Craig, you may have to get the revised version.
Believe me, I've been thinking about it. I do know that I got the e version of it when it was offered, but I think I might have to get the fully updated revised edition.
You can get it for free. You can write to jacobsbrownpress@gmail.com, and you can mail in your old black one. The black book. It looks like a phone book to me. Some people like it. Some people say it's kind of a cool cover. I don't know. I just didn't like it. You can mail that in, and you'll get a revised version sent out to you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the copy that you mail in will be destroyed. They all were. They all were. Matter of fact, I personally destroyed them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
Well, that's good
Now,
to know.
not always me. There was too many of them, but I destroyed some. I had a fun day where some were brought over here, and I just went out and ripped them up and put them in the recycle bin.
Oh,
And
geez.
because it's just when you're and believe me, part of me was saying maybe I should save some of these, and if they go up in price, I could sell them privately. But at the same time, when you're a writer and you just want it to be as good as it can be.
Sure.
And so that revised version was just cleaned up. We had 4 different proofreaders go through it, all big Star Trek fans. So they were not only looking for any little mistakes, but as far as typos or anything like that, but they were looking for any other kind of mistakes where maybe I goofed on something, and they could come back and say, "Hey, Mark, on this, because we know this episode by heart. The person's name is actually whatever." And well, I got a phone call from Harlan Ellison on that too. He calls me up and he says, "Mark, I love the book, but the name is Edith Keeler, not Edith Kessler." Now, I got to say, that was a typo. It's Edith Keeler throughout the 20 pages devoted to that one episode. And on one page of that first edition, it says Kessler. And that's one of those things where the fingers just mess up on the keyboard and somebody didn't catch it because, you can't see your own mistakes. We had one editor that was going through it. And this person was, I think, just overwhelmed by the size of these books. It was, oh my God, this is over 600 pages, and it's just season 1. And so some of this stuff slipped through. So then we brought in a whole team of Scott Brooks, Mark Alfred, Tom Tucker, and George Brozak. I didn't know, it just popped back into my head. And George Brozak wrote for a couple of the Star Trek series, Next Generation and one of the others. And Mark Alfred has a popular website, Super. I can't remember. Tom Tucker's been an editor for years, and Scott Brooks is a very successful illustrator who does graphic novels, and they're all huge Star Trek fans. And so these guys just did an amazing job of going through the revised book 1, book 2, and book 3 to try to make these things as good as they can possibly be for everybody.
That is great. That is really great to see that.
Superfan. His website is called Mark's Superfan.
All right. Excellent.
Very cool. Well, Mark, I don't know if you've looked at the Kickstarter page lately, but it looks to me, I'm just kind of a cursory count here. You've got about 400 books to sign so far.
I was told close to 500 by email today. And it was, oh God, I know what I'll be doing for a couple days. Now, these books are going to get printed on December 1st and 2nd in Minnesota. We put through the order once we had reached the minimum level, which I think was 20 grand. So we got to that grand, so we put the order through to run these things on the 1st and 2nd of December. And so they'll ship out on the 3rd or 4th to Los Angeles. It takes about 5 or 6 or 7 days to get here. And if there's snow, it could take a few days more. So I don't know if they're going to hit here around the 11th, 12th, or 13th or what, but I got to kind of be around and be ready to start signing books for a couple days.
Well, yeah, we won't hold you up much longer as you get ready to sign all those books. But so far this season, we just started our season 3 coverage earlier, a couple of weeks back. And so far we've done up through "And the Children Shall Lead." Is there anything in those 4 episodes that stand out to you as interesting sections of the book?
Oh, yeah. All of them. Well, let's start with the first one, Spectre of the Gun. It was written by Gene Kuhn. Why does it say Lee Cronin? You look in a lot of other books on Star Trek, or you look on the internet in a lot of places, and they'll tell you, well, he was embarrassed by the scripts he did in the 3rd season. No, he was not. He loved that script, and everybody on Star Trek loved that episode. They all were in love with that episode, except, oddly enough, director Vincent McIvety. When I interviewed him, he said it wasn't his favorite, but you look at his ideas and what he did in that episode, the way he filmed it, where the Earps are all walking towards camera, and then the next time you go back, they're in a different position, where this guy's now on the left and this guy's on the right. That wasn't in the script. That was Vincent's idea because he kept doing things to create the dreamlike effect. Bob Justman loved that episode because it was his idea to say, Jerry Pennerman claimed it was his idea, but whichever one of them came up with it, they probably came up with it, to make the sets minimalistic, incomplete. So I've just fragmented because the Melkotians were taking all this out of Kirk's mind, and it was our memories aren't complete. And so there's just so many fun things in that episode that made it to the screen. You want to talk about what didn't make it to the screen? How about in the original treatments and the first draft of the script, Kuhn had it to where, I didn't tell you why he wrote it under Lee Cronin. I'll get back to that in a moment. Kuhn had it to where the reason the Melkotians wanted nothing to do with us is because they had been receiving television from Earth, and it took a few decades for the TV to get to them. And so they were watching 1960s television with all the violence, pre-1968, obviously. and so, Combat and Man from Uncle and all the Westerns and the shoot-em-ups. And it was estimated with all those Westerns on TV in the 1950s that we killed the population of the Earth 3 times over. I read that once, and I believe it. They were watching all this stuff, and they wanted nothing to do with mankind. Who could blame them? They'd been watching our television. Imagine if they were watching it now and seeing things like Real Housewives of Orange County. My God.
True.
So that was a great idea that didn't make it in. Why didn't it make it in? Because NBC said, you can't put that in. You're making us look bad. You're making all the networks look bad. We're presenting quality programming. You can't say something like that on our network. So that's the fun for me, of the research and doing these books, writing the books, and I hope it's the fun of everybody who reads them, is you see the battle lines between the creative end and TV, broadcasters, and why things got stopped and why they couldn't go on. And the thing for the fragmented sets, as great of an idea as it was mainly done out of budget. The budget had been so brutally cut. And they said, how can we build all this? So we don't have the money to go to a Western town. We got to shoot it on the soundstage. How can we afford this? And that's when Justman and Fenneman both came up with this idea individually that we'll do fragmented sets. And so sometimes out of desperation, you come up with an idea that makes it even better. Did you know? No, you didn't know. I found out from Vincent McIvety, and then I looked in the production records and confirmed it. One of the guys who played one of the Earps had to be replaced in the second day of filming, and they had to go back and reshoot everything.
Oh, wow.
The episode went a day over. Why did he have to be replaced? He was a young actor, very, very talented, playing one of the younger Earps, and Vincent thought the world of him. They auditioned him. They'd seen a little film on him. They thought he was great. But he was so intimidated by being there on Star Trek and so freaked out by the surrealistic sets and the bizarre script and everything that it was just overwhelming to him. And he was just kind of losing it. And Vincent took him into the dressing room and tried to talk to him and said, pull it together, and he couldn't do it. And so he made the decision that we're just going to have to replace him and reshoot. Wow. And we're taking one of the other guys and bumping him up. You're going to play Wyatt Earp instead of Virgil Earp or whatever, and we're going to find a new actor to come in and play the character you were going to play, and that way I can at least get something shot this afternoon, and then we'll bring somebody in fresh in the morning. And these are the battles that get fought as you're doing a TV show. Okay, do you want to talk about any of those other first ones, or have I taken up too much time on Spectre of the Gun?
No, that's fine. If you have anything related to Spock's brain, we'd love to hear it.
All right. Spock's brain. Now, we always wondered why, and that's what you'll notice a lot of times in the story behind the story. I'll do the script timeline, and very occasionally on a few episodes, I'll do a subtitle to it. What were they thinking? Because it's one of those episodes where you go, come on, man, this is such a great series, and 90% of the episodes are just home runs. What happened here? What the hell were they thinking? And actually, they were always thinking, and they were always trying so hard to make every episode special and unique and important. But you can't always succeed. And with Spock's brain, what it had, again, Gene Coon. So remind me, guys, to tell you about Lee Cronin again, because here's 2 Gene Coon scripts in a row. But just a couple weeks before, Gene Coon and Gene Roddenberry together came up with that idea while they met in Gene Roddenberry's office. The first heart transplant had taken place. And it was major headlines all around the world in all the newspapers. And there were major protests all around the world from certain groups that were saying man doesn't have the right to play God. You can't take a heart out of one man and put it in another. Maybe a kidney, but not a heart. And they just kind of looked at each other and said, we got to do something with this. Well, 250 years from now, a heart transplant is going to be old news. So what would be the next big thing from the heart? And they said the brain. Now, okay, we can look back and go, all right, guys, you should have had a good laugh about it and drop it. But you can at least appreciate the fact that they were looking at the news, they were looking at the headlines, they were looking at what everybody was talking about that day and for weeks, and saying, how can we turn this into provocative television? There's a lot of rumors that Gene Coon wrote it as a comedy. He did not. He wrote it as a straight drama, but he put in some humorous scenes, especially towards the end. Where in the end there was a great scene, or might have been a great scene, where after they get back to the ship, Spock sneezes, and McCoy and McCoy and Kirk look over at him, and because he sneezes like 3 times in a row or something, they look over and say, what's the wrong? And he says, I was endeavoring to raise my eyebrow because McCoy had wired up something wrong in his brain. and you find, well, the Vulcan ability will correct it. It'll rechannel the thought process in time, but for now, anytime he tries to raise his eyebrow, he's going to sneeze.
Oh, wow.
So Gene Coon did put in some very, very funny bits, but he mostly played it serious because heart transplants were very serious. And the first heart transplant experiment died. I believe the second one did too.
Mm-hmm.
They were in South Africa, and they weren't allowed to be done in America. My God, but they were done in South Africa, and the first couple patients died within days or weeks after the heart transplant. So it was a pretty serious subject matter. So they weren't going to approach it tongue in cheek, but they could see the humor in the situation as well, and they were willing to play it that way.
Right.
At the end, that got taken out. Why did it get taken out? Because Gene Roddenberry, not Fred Freiberger. There's the other revelation people are going to find when they read book 3 is Fred Freiberger has really gotten a bum rap for 4.5 decades now. My heart goes out to this man because he's the guy who put the Wild Wild West together. He was this producer, and everybody says he's a show killer. He would always come in and do the last season of an episode that would go off the air. No, he did the first season of the Wild Wild West. He did a couple other shows before that, Ben Casey and so forth. But he was the guy who came in and brought in all the elements that made the Wild Wild West work, including Dr. Miguelito Loveless, Michael Dunn, and just the macabre of that, blending spy with sci-fi with Western. He didn't create the show, Michael Garrison did, but Michael Garrison's concept was very vague. It was Fred Freiberger who came in and really put that together and got the scripts into work and made it happen. And then Gene Coon replaced Fred Freiberger on the Wild Wild West, curiously enough. So this guy had pretty impressive credentials, and Roddenberry had wanted Freiberger in season 1 when John D.F. Black said he was going to leave. And he was burned out. Everybody get burned out after 6 months on that show, working 14-hour days, weekends. And Freiberger wasn't available, so he got Gene Coon. So the guy who replaced Freiberger on the Wild Wild West gets the job on Star Trek because Freiberger's not available. Freiberger's not available. And so now in season 3, we get Fred Freiberger. And he comes in thinking he's going to be working side by side next to Gene Roddenberry, and Gene Roddenberry gives out the first 16 assignments. You can't blame Fred if you don't like some of those stories. They were, and The Children Shall Lead was assigned by Gene Roddenberry, not Fred Freiberger. So Fred comes in and he's got to pretty much realize these episodes that have already been put into work by somebody else. And Gene Roddenberry did not want to go towards comedy. That's why Gene Coon left. If you've read book 2, you know about that blow up after Trouble with Tribbles.
Right.
And I Mud. So, there wasn't going to be any comedy. The two Genes were still friends. That's why Gene Coon was doing 4 script assignments, and it was supposed to be 6. He just didn't want to produce the show if he wasn't going to be free to produce it the way he wanted to, so he left. Gene Roddenberry was not happy with the way John Meredith Lucas performed during the last part of the second season, and he had a chance to bring in Freddie, who he wanted in the first place, so he brought in Freddie, and together they may have made one hell of a team. But without Roddenberry there, without the creator and the visionary of Star Trek, the show had lost quite a bit.
Yeah.
And when you're reading book 3, you're going to be stunned to see how much input there is from Gene Roddenberry, how many memos there are from Gene Roddenberry on a lot of those first episodes, the Paradise Syndrome especially. Roddenberry loved that idea and gave out that assignment and loved Margaret Arman, and lots of memos from him about nuances in the story and things to do in that episode and what he liked about the theme and on and on. So Gene Roddenberry was far more involved with the 3rd season than people realized. It started to change towards the end of that year, but in the beginning, especially the first 16 episodes, he was very, very heavily involved.
Wow. So we are looking forward to reading about that. And before we let you go, Lee Cronin.
Oh, thank you. Well, let me explain one thing real fast. As Gene Roddenberry, if you look at the first 16 episodes of the first season, there's no humor. There's no humor in the Corbomite Maneuver. There's no humor in I guess there's a tiny bit in The Naked Time and Charlie X, just because of the situation of Charlie swatting Yeoman Rand on the rump and Kirk having to talk to him is kind of a funny situation. And Roddenberry wrote that scene, by the way, the Kirk fatherly talk scene. That was written by Gene, not Dorothy. But they were very serious episodes. Dagger of the Mind, Conscience of the King, and on and on. Enemy Within. There were no humor in those episodes. And that's what Roddenberry wanted to bring the show back to in its 3rd year. He thought it had gotten a little loose during the 2nd season. We love those fun episodes. We love the sparring between Kirk and between McCoy and Spock. We love all that. But again, what these books do is they take you back in time, and you can see how it was then and what everybody was reacting to and dealing with. And what was happening then is Star Trek was in a battle with Lost in Space, the two highest rated sci-fi shows on TV, and Lost in Space was getting more and more silly, and so Roddenberry wanted to go the serious route, and that's why he and Gene Coon had their falling out, creative differences, and that's why he gave a mandate to Fred Freiberger, no jokes, we're playing this straight, watch the first 16 episodes of season 1, that's how I want to play this. And that would have been great, but without him in the office to help with the rewrites, you're missing some of the quality. Without the budgets that you had before, you're missing some of the quality. Without some of the action and adventure elements that you had before, because of the FCC mandate, missing some of the quality. And with people just getting burned out and knowing they're in their last season and they're on death row, you're missing some of the quality. So that's what happens. Okay, Lee Cronin. So Gene Coon left Star Trek and he signed a contract with Universal Pictures to produce It Takes a Thief. So he's the showrunner over on It Takes a Thief. When you're a showrunner working for one studio, Studio A, you don't go over and take script assignments from Studio B.
Right.
On a different network as well. It Takes a Thief was Universal, ABC. Star Trek was Paramount, NBC. You don't do that. And his contract didn't allow him to do it. So as a favor to Gene Roddenberry, and because he loved Star Trek, he continued to write for Star Trek, but he had to do it under an assumed name, which is not unusual in this industry. We all do it. But the thing is pseudonyms are very common. But the thing is that everybody was involved in this conspiracy. You read these memos in book 3, and there's memos from NBC, from Stan Robertson at NBC saying, oh, I didn't realize Mr. Cronin was the one writing the script, but we need to get this into development very quickly before he gets busy elsewhere. and so they, in all the memos, they never say Gene Coon. The memos between Justman and Roddenberry, between Stan Robertson and NBC, between Lego, everybody else, it's always Mr. Cronin, you know, and because they couldn't put the name Coon in a memo. They couldn't put it in a document to where if it got out, it could create a lawsuit and maybe ruin somebody's career and his professional reputation.
Right, right.
So they all were involved in this conspiracy, including the head of the networks and the studios. To me, that was fascinating when I uncovered that in the show files and saw those documents and realized what was going on. I mean, I just was tickled to death because it was like, no, who knew? None of us knew. We always, why isn't he using his other name? Is he embarrassed? No, he wasn't embarrassed. It was all a legal thing and just trying not to get into trouble.
Wow, that is amazing, and it's just a a sample of what we've been getting in these books in terms of the information that you've been uncovering, Mark. And I know all of us fans are very, very thankful that you were able to go ahead and do these books and put in the time and the effort that you put in. I know we all appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, because I appreciate hearing that.
Right.
I've aged 20 years.
So I think that's about it. Jeff, is there anything else we want to say?
No, I think we got that about covered.
Oh, good. He's still awake. I was afraid Jeff had gone to sleep.
Oh, no, I'm still here. I would love to keep talking, but I also would love to have Mark come back on again at some point. So I don't want to exhaust all the conversation.
Hey, Mark, do you have a favorite season 3 episode?
Oh, of course, and several.
All right. Well, how about we keep that a secret? And would you mind coming back for the introduction of that episode when we get to it?
Yeah. Send me your schedule as far as you're discussing these episodes.
All right. Excellent.
I mean, I'll be happy to come on anytime you're discussing any episodes, because I love talking Star Trek, and you know me, I can talk my head off.
All right.
And there's so much to talk about with each episode. And now that the book's coming out, I don't have to be secretive about it. It's not like I have to hold back. I can I can talk about these things. But the Empath, I think, was an excellent episode, and it was Gene Roddenberry's favorite of the entire series, and it was DeForest Kelley's favorite of the entire series.
Wow.
The themes involved in that episode, and just the surrealistic filming approach and the eeriness and the beautiful score. I mean, it's not a typical Star Trek episode, and I think that's the problem people have with the Empath and Spectre Gun. Some people may say, "Well, that's not my favorite; it would never make my top 10 list or even my top 20 list," because it's not typical Star Trek. But if you really look at it and look at the quality of it as a unique piece, there's something very, very interesting about a couple of those episodes. The Tholian Web is a very entertaining episode. All Our Yesterdays is a very entertaining episode. And although a lot of people chuckle at it, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, I think, is a very profound episode because of the simplicity of it. Yeah. Racial bigotry is so absurd that if you're going to comment on it, do it in an absurd manner. Nothing can be more effective in my mind. Now, other people will say differently, and they'll say, no, it's too campy. But I don't know. I think the campiness is part of the charm of that, because it really helps drive home the point. When Frank Gorshin says that thing about all of his people are black on the right side, my people are black on the left side, and you go, okay, this is too silly, but isn't racial bigotry silly?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can think of a lot of good reasons to hate people, but that's not one.
Yeah. So excellent. It sounds like we have a lot of episodes we can talk to you about when we get to them, and we will definitely take you up on that, and thank you. So make sure you go over and check out the season 3, These Are the Voyages Kickstarter, to get the 3rd season and some other cool incentives, as well as the first 2 volumes. And Mark, thank you so much, and best of luck on the signing of the 400 to 500 books you're going to be signing after the Kickstarter ends.
Yeah, if my signature looks really kind of awful, it's my hand's going to get a little cramped. But I love doing it, because each one of those, when book 2 came out, we did pre-ordering, and we did 800 books in 2 days that I had to autograph, and each one was actually a pleasure. I'm not joking. It was a pleasure, because I'm seeing the name of who it's going to and where they live, and it became a game for me. It was fun saying, "Oh my God, here's the 3rd one going to Ohio this week, or this hour," and just seeing where the books were going off to was actually kind of fun. So I expect it's going to be an enjoyable 2 days for me to do it. But yeah, my hand will start to cramp up at some point.
Well, that's cool.
And my signature doesn't look that good in the first place.
Well, it's cool to know that you'll be playing a little game as you sign. So, Mark, thank you again for taking the time to come on with us. We always like talking to you, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Jeff, Craig, thank you so much. Good talking to you. I hope to, and yeah, if you're going to be talking about an episode and you want my input, just send us an email and let us know, and I'll be there. Okay?
We definitely will.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, and we are back on the Tricorder Transmissions, and we are pleased to talk to Star Trek Axanar creator, Alec Peters.
Hey, guys.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your project.
Oh, my pleasure.
Before we get into Axanar, would you mind letting our listeners in on your Star Trek history?
Well, I am old enough to actually have seen Star Trek when it was first on TV. And I was a young lad of 6 years old when Star Trek first came on. And I remember I even remember the little teaser trailers. They had this, that was just this like image of Star Trek, the word Star Trek carved out in a rock, on a side of a mountain. And I remember those. And I watched it and I was a big fan. And then on the third season, when NBC moved it to 10 o'clock on Friday nights, because they really kind of had it with Star Trek. They brought it back because of the fan response, but they were kind of sick and tired of Gene Roddenberry by that point. So they moved it to Friday night at 10, and that was way past my bedtime because at that point I was 8. And so my mom would put me to bed at 8 o'clock, wake me up at 10, let me see Star Trek, and put me back to bed. So I have a great mom. And that was kind of how it all started. And then I would watch it religiously in reruns on Channel 11 in New York, where I grew up, where people like Doug Drexler would watch it as well. Richard Hatch. We all used to watch it on Channel 11 in the reruns at 6 o'clock every evening.
Excellent. It's funny, in college, I lived on Long Island with my grandfather, and I used to watch it when they ran it at 11 o'clock on Sunday nights. All right. So I know we normally have a line of questions that we go through. Jeff, do you want to present those?
Yeah, sure. So, as our listeners know, but I'm not sure if Alec knows, our show is an original series focused podcast. And as such, we like to ask all of our guests about some of their favorite things about the original series. And of course, they're pretty boilerplate questions, but we always start off with, do you have a favorite episode of the original series?
Well, yeah. So that's. I mean, it's all. You would think I would say to you, "Oh, Whom Gods Destroy, season 3. That's my favorite." It's not, which isn't true because I think overall it's not a great episode. I just happen to like the idea of Captain Garth and Stephen Hatt's portrayal of him, which always led to the question of who was this guy. So, but that being said, I mean, as far as favorite episodes, one of my you go with most of the standards, right? Oh, City on the Edge of Forever, that's a great one. Matter of fact, my girlfriend and I watched that when we were living in different cities. We watched City on the Edge of Forever as our first quote unquote date night on Netflix together. She was in Kentucky, I was in LA, and we watched that, and that was a lot of fun. A Doomsday Machine is probably and I have to say the remastered Doomsday Machine.
Yes.
I am one of those people who loves the remastered. I don't care for the nostalgia. I mean, yes, I grew up watching that way, but let's face it, the special effects are weak at times. They've aged, they're 50 years old. And watching the remastered Doomsday Machine is such a delight. I bet you I've watched it half a dozen times the past year. That's how much I love that episode. In the remastered, the color is so vibrant, and the special effects really add so much to that episode. And it's just, William Wyndham is brilliant in that episode. There's great stuff with Kirk, with Spock and McCoy. I just love that episode. So, if you said, Alec, one episode, you're stuck on a desert island, that would be it.
That's good. Doomsday Machine is pretty high on my list as well. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah. And in the remastered version, you got a lot of great space combat scenes.
Oh, yeah. It's so good. Yeah, they did such a wonderful job with it. Absolutely.
So this is usually a tougher one for some people, but I have a feeling it might be easy for you. Favorite original series character?
God. Well, so here's the thing that's funny. I don't really have a favorite character.
All right.
I really don't. I don't. If you push me, I'd probably go for McCoy. If you pushed me, but really, what I love about the original series is the way the three of them work together.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that's what makes that crew strong, is the three of them. Because I mean, you think of Kirk with a different first officer or a different chief medical officer, and he's not as strong.
Well, since you did kind of single out McCoy a little bit, do you have any particular McCoy moments that you like to reflect on, or that are particularly meaningful for you?
The great thing about McCoy is the range of emotions that he will go through.
Mm-hmm.
He really is the human core of the original series. It's his humanity that anchors the other two guys, because you see everything from that guy. You see his sense of humor. You see his deep feeling, like I think it's in Balance of Terror when he tells Kirk, don't let it destroy you. There's so many times when we see him as I think it's our lens into that world, because he's the most human of the characters, despite what Kirk says about Spock in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. It really is McCoy. So that's what I love about that character. And he's very emotional, and not always right, but I love his emotion.
Excellent. So we're actually talking to you in regards to your project Axanar, and it was alluded to that you sort of got the idea for it from the third season episode, Whom Gods Destroy.
Right.
So for everybody listening, you're going to want to head over to StarTrekAxanar.com, and you're going to want to watch the prelude to Axanar, which is a 21-minute setup. Alec, do you want to sort of give us a quick rundown of the project and then also explain how the prelude came about?
Sure. So Axanar it's a story about the Battle of Axanar and Garth of Izar. And we hear about this in the third season episode, Whom Gods Destroy, that Kirk tells that Garth's book is required reading at the Academy, that the Battle of Axanar, he studied it at the Academy, and he's Kirk's hero. Well, I wanted to know about this guy. Who's Kirk's hero? That's a pretty... if you're Kirk's hero, you're pretty badass. So I wanted to know about him. And that's kind of where where the starting point was, and what was it? What was who was this guy, and why was he Kirk's hero? And so I had written my first Garth story like 20 years ago, I tell people, and then 4 years ago I was up at Star Trek Phase 2. James Cawley had invited me up there. He actually wrote Garth into a scene just for me, and I came up and played him. That's how it started. And James convinced me to write a script, which we did, and it started gathering steam. So when we got to the Kickstarter, we raised $100,000 for Prelude to Axanar, and the whole idea was we just did a shoot in my apartment where it was just us talking about what we wanted to do, and we raised $100,000. Then we took that $100,000 and we made Prelude. And the whole idea was, how do we make something that shows what we're capable of without spending a fortune? And, you raise $100,000, you basically get 90% of it. Then you have to set aside 15% for perks. So realistically, we had about $75,000 to work with. And when we were trying to, we looked at like Star Trek Renegades, what they had done, because they had very successful Kickstarters. And we tried to think about, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to show people what we can do? Because we really don't have everything that we need to do a trailer. And so I looked at what they did and how they kind of had the Talking Heads trailer with Walter Koenig as Admiral Chekhov, and Tim Russ as Tuvok. And I said, okay, that's interesting. So they basically just had these guys stand in front of a green screen. That's interesting. And I was inspired by, if you're fans of the old series MASH, there's a great episode there called The Interview, which is them basically being interviewed, the characters in the MASH being interviewed by a film crew. And so I said, wow, what if we did that? And it's also kind of inspired by the interviews you see in like Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan, where they're interviewing the survivors of the war. And I said, wow, that would be great. And then I pitched the idea to Christian, our director. He loved it, and we were off to the races. And it honestly came out way better than we thought it would. But that's because we were pretty demanding about what we expected. So that's kind of how Prelude came about. And it is unbelievable, the fan response. Fans absolutely love it.
Yeah,
so we feel blessed.
Yeah, it really was a cool, unique presentation in terms of seeing something like that in the Star Trek universe. And I unfortunately, we weren't able to go to your Prelude screening in Vegas over the summer during convention time, but I was able to watch it when we got back, and I was very, very impressed and very interested in seeing what the full project will look like.
Yeah, well, one of the things that really stood out about the Prelude was the cast of characters that you've got involved in this, and you've got some pretty big names involved. And we were a little bit curious as to how you lined up some of those big names.
Yeah, well, the way it happened was we first got Richard Hatch. He was he's my old acting coach. I first studied with him 20 years ago. So I pitched Richard on it one night. As I always say, I applied him with sake and sushi, and he was sold on it. And after that, we got J.G. Herschler. And after that, we got Gary Graham. And after Gary, we got, I think we got Kate Vernon next. I think Tony Todd was the last one in. That's kind of how that went. So it worked out great.
Yeah, it's really awesome.
Yeah, we just built one on top of the other. You say to J.G. Herschel, well, Richard Hatch is doing it, and those guys know each other. So they were like, oh, cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the Battlestar Galactica reboot. I was glad to see a couple of these, the veterans from that are going to be in Axanar as well.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of the new Battlestar Galactica. I was a fan of the first one too, but that doesn't particularly hold up well these days.
No.
But no, I'm totally a fan. And Kate Vernon, it was as I tell the story, Christian and I saw Kate Vernon at WonderCon in 2013, and we were because her table is right next to Richard Hatch. So I'm bullshitting with Richard, and Christian starts talking to Kate, and then Richard leaves, so I go over and start talking to Kate. And when we left Kate, we're walking away, and I turn to Christian and I say, "We are so fracking putting her in Axanar," because I just saw this potential to do something very different than anything we've seen in Star Trek before, and I like that. We are constantly trying to do things different that no one has done before.
So you guys are in pre-production now.
Yep.
And you're still scheduled to start on in the spring?
We are looking right now to start in March or April. There's a little snag in that right now the main thrust is getting our studio. And that means getting a warehouse and converting it into a soundstage. Mm-hmm. And that's no small task. The first is trying to actually get a warehouse. We were originally looking at 10,000 square feet of warehouse space, and we just realized that's just way too small if we're going to make this a working studio. And not just do Axanar, but do other Star Treks after that. Whether we go back and look at earlier in the war, people have asked us to do that, or whether we go and, we've talked about doing the early voyages of the Enterprise under Robert April. There's lots of possibilities that we could do. And people love the fact that we're not just regurgitating Star Trek as it's seen before, whether that's TOS or anything else. People like the fact that we're doing something unique and new and different, and a time period they've never seen before.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to see that you picked a character from an episode and expanded on it that way. So it really is a nice draw. So you're helping out the folks on These Are the Voyages with a Kickstarter for their third season. And I guess some of the money from that Kickstarter is going to help you guys out. But you're also still taking retroactive donations that have rewards levels over on your website?
Yeah, so what happened is people in the first Axanar, or in the second Axanar Kickstarter, kept saying, well, we want a Blu-ray or the DVD and the CD soundtrack. How do we get that? And we're like, oh, okay, well, we really can't sell that per se, just because of CBS and licensing and so forth. But if you donate, we'll give it to you. It's a funny distinction, but it's important. And so we basically allow people to donate to either of our two Kickstarters and get the perks that were in those Kickstarters. For the first Kickstarter, the Prelude Kickstarter, you can get the CD, the DVD, or the Blu-ray. Those are the three levels that we offer from that. And in the second Kickstarter, you can get any of the levels. So if you haven't donated already, you can still be a part of Axanar.
All right, cool. And we will include the links to your website and the donation page in the show notes.
That'd be great.
Before we wrap up, I kind of wanted to jump in and ask one more Axanar related question. I was going through the list of characters that you have involved, and I see there's a nice mix of a couple of characters we're familiar with and a bunch of new characters. But one character that we're familiar with that really caught my eyes, one of my favorite Klingons of all time, is listed in there, and that is Chang. And I really, really loved that character from Star Trek VI. And I was wondering, I don't want to get any spoilers out of you on this, but I was wondering, how you came up with the choice to include him. If there was anything special about him that inspired you to pick him.
Yeah, it's really because it's a story element. I think one of the things that fan films do, and we don't call ourselves a fan film, basically because it's not a bunch of fans working on Star Trek. It's a bunch of professionals. Granted, I'm a fan, and Christian's a fan, and Rob Burnett, our editor, who's the writer-director of Free Enterprise, he's a fan. But once you start going into our DP, our construction coordinator, all the department heads, they're not fans. They're professionals who work in the entertainment industry. Mm-hmm. So top to bottom, we have a professional crew. So it's really not a fan film. We call it independent Star Trek. That's what we call it. And one of the mistakes fan films always do is it's this constant fan service. Mm-hmm. They're always revisiting favorite episodes, or they're replicating, TOS or whatever, which is, God bless, there's a market for that. A lot of people like that. And I worked on Star Trek Phase 2, and I love the people up there. And they've got a lot of fans. It's awesome. But, again, difference between fan film and independent Star Trek is we can't do things just because the fans want to see it. It's got to make sense. We have to be able to justify this as a story element. So Chang's in there because, this is 20 years before the original series. This is when you put out Chang's timeline. He's probably a young lieutenant at this point, lieutenant commander, something like that. And Axanar, once you see Axanar, it absolutely sets up Star Trek 6.
Wow.
You understand why Chang is doing what he's doing in Star Trek 6.
Awesome.
And so that was why it was important to have him in there. And we've done it. I mean, listen, we did it with Richard Daystrom. My attitude is looking at the timeline and go, this is 2 years after Daystrom won the Nobel in Z heyday. Why don't we put Daystrom in there? Well, you better have a really good reason if you're going to put Rich Daystrom in Axanar. And we figured it out. My good friend Rick Stockfield from Facebook, and they were really cool, and they didn't serve the story, so we took them out. They just slowed the story down, and there was no rationale. Now, we may do that as a vignette. We've talked about doing it as a vignette. It would be a lot of fun, so we may do that. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well, that sounds really great. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Chang plays out in this story.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. I really do.
Great. So, Alec, thank you so much for giving us an update and an introduction to our listeners on your project, Axanar, and we're looking forward to track it as you get closer to filming, and we hope that at some point you'll come back on and give us an update.
Hey, listen, anytime, guys. Love chatting about it, so just Skype me or Facebook me and let me know, and I'll be happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Alec. So there we go. That was our conversation with Alec Peters. And can't wait to see the finished product there.
Definitely. And it's pretty exciting. And I once again, I'll repeat that I love the fact that Chang is going to be in this. He's my favorite Klingon of all time. So another great thing for me to look forward to personally. But everybody out there, I think this is going to be one of the really special independent Star Trek films.
Oh, totally. So make sure to check out Axanar's website and the Kickstarter for These Are the Voyages Season 3. Because they both have great things to offer. And we will see you next week with a regularly scheduled commentary track.